Today we're going to have a look at the video by converted to Islam on the true date of Gnostic Christianity. In this video he goes to attack the historicity of the crucifixion and claims that the earliest Christians did not believe the crucifixion to be true. So let's hear what he has to say.
The Quran simply states, without getting into any great detail, that Jesus was not killed, but it only appeared that he was. This factual statement just happens to correspond to what early Christians believed about Jesus' alleged crucifixion, because the Docetic and Gnostic Christians believed similarly. This only means that despite the falsehood in the faith of the Docetic and Gnostics, they were at least correct in rejecting the belief in Jesus' alleged crucifixion and murder.
So what we see here is that converted to Islam wants to have it both ways. He wishes to claim that the Gnostic beliefs are representative of early Christianity, and thus confirm the Quranic claims. But then, he also wants to claim that the Gnostic beliefs were wrong. However, the problem here is that the Gnostic texts that deny Jesus' death by crucifixion do not do so on a historical basis, but on the basis of their Gnostic beliefs that converted to Islam disagrees with. For example, if we take the Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter, which is the text most often cited by Muslims in this regard, we go to the non-Christian scholars such as Bar-Ehrman, and he dates it to the 3rd century. But what happens when we read this text? I admit, the author of the Apocalypse of Peter does not believe Jesus died on the cross. However, this is a result of the author's Gnostic beliefs. That is, Jesus was a spiritual heavenly being that could not physically be crucified. This is nothing like the Islamic claim that Jesus was simply risen up. Jesus to Islam was a mere mortal prophet man. He was nothing more. He was not a heavenly being. So, if we do not believe what the Gnostics believe, which is the reason for their claim that Jesus didn't die, how can we say this confirms the Quranic claims? It simply does not. So, I think now we should take a look at what the early Christians actually believed with regard to the historicity of the crucifixion and Jesus' death. Now, despite converted to Islam's claim that the early Christians did not believe Jesus to have died by crucifixion, it is important to go to the earliest sources, not sources written by late heretics in the 3rd century. For example, every historical source from the 1st century AD that covers Jesus' life testifies to the crucifixion. Within the New Testament corpus alone, we have multiple and independent historical attestation from eyewitnesses of the crucifixion. Within these texts, we have traditions and creeds that predate themselves. For example, in 1 Corinthians 15:3-5, we have an early Christian creed which Paul received from the apostles. This creed dates to a few years after Jesus' death. The creed reads that Paul has passed on that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Paul then goes on. Then he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to the apostles. So here we see that multiple attestation to the crucifixion, and then we are lucky enough to hear of the eyewitnesses on the resurrection. Now, if we want to go outside of the Christian sphere, we can have a look at what non-Christian scholars, including those who are anti-Christian, have to say about the historicity of the crucifixion. Go to Bar-Ehrman. He says, "One of the most certain facts of history is that Jesus was crucified on orders of the Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate." Gert Ludman, another Christian critic, says, "Jesus' death as consequence of crucifixion is indisputable." John Dominic Crossan of the Jesus Seminar says, "That he was crucified is as sure as anything historical can ever be." Geza Vermesh says, "The passion of Jesus is part of history." I think it is fair to say that the historical consensus on both the ancient sources and historical interpretations is that Jesus died by crucifixion. This is indisputable, and the Quranic claim has no authority or historical reliability.
The Gospel of Peter, which dates from around 70 to 160 CE. If we take the earliest date of 70 CE, this means it was written earlier than many of the New Testament books we have today in the Bible. This also means the Gospel of Peter comes only 37 years after Jesus. This Gospel says in verse 19, quote, "And the Lord cried out aloud, saying, my power, thou hast forsaken me. And when he had so said, he was taken up." So here there's no mention of Jesus dying on the cross at all. Instead, he was just simply taken up.
Two interesting points are raised here. Firstly, that a probable date for the Gospel of Peter is 70 AD, and secondly, that the Gospel of Peter confirms the Islamic belief that Jesus did not die on the cross. Regarding the first point, in all my research I could not find a reputable source that gave a date prior to the 2nd century. New Testament scholar Darrell Bock prescribes a mid-2nd century date. Similarly, Bart Ehrman gives a date of the early 2nd century. However, I am not fussed by the question of dating near as much as I am about the second claim. Converted to Islam clearly states that the Gospel makes no mention of Jesus dying. There is no honesty in this claim. In actual fact, the Gospel, which parallels the canonical Gospels, contains the Passion narrative. Jesus dies on the cross, his body is removed, he is buried, and he rises again. But one not need take my word on it. Let's read from the text itself. Verse 28. The scribes, Pharisees, and elders gathered together and heard all the people murmuring and beating their breasts, saying, "If such great signs happened when he died, you can see how righteous he was." But the text goes on. Verse 56. "Why have you come? Whom are you seeking? Not the one who was crucified. He has risen and left. But if you do not believe it, stoop down to look, and see the place where he was laid, that he is not there. For he has risen and left for the place from which he was sent." So, it is clear that the Gospel of Peter teaches that Jesus was crucified and rose again. So now, just to summarize the points of the video, despite the claims of converted to Islam, we have seen that the evidence confirms the following 5 points. Firstly, the early Christians believed that Jesus was crucified. Secondly, the Gnostics, who later believed Jesus was not crucified, did so for ideological reasons, not historical reasons. And these ideological reasons are those that contradict Islam, converted to Islam himself says are not true. Thirdly, the text Muslims cite to prove early Christians believed Jesus was not crucified is dated to the 3rd century. The fourth point, the Gospel of Peter is most likely a 2nd century document. Finally, the Gospel of Peter in fact teaches that Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead. This is despite the claims of converted to Islam that it confirms the Quranic stories. So, in short, we have seen that there is no historical evidence to support the Quranic conjecture.